What's up, YouTubers? Want to welcome everyone to my second video. Since a lot of my videos hopefully will be testing out different Linux distribution releases, I decided to show you and highlight the tool that I use to get this done. Oracle VM Virtualbox Manager. That's my bread and butter for testing out different operating systems on my main PC here at home. What a VirtualBox Manager really is in a nutshell is a piece of software that's very intricate yet very, very beautifully done. It fools operating systems into thinking they're running on real hardware when what they're running on is software virtualized hardware. Basically, it creates a PC within a PC. Yeah, the main PC that VirtualBox is running on top of will be called or is called the host, and any of the operating systems that you install within VirtualBox are called guests. The guests really, at least in their default state, don't know that they're running on a host computer. So it's really good. One of the biggest advantages is that the guest by default is isolated completely from the host. So that's why you see a lot of people on YouTube testing antiviruses and anti-malware programs. Most of them are doing it within a virtual machine. Very easy to destroy the virtual machine after by deleting all the files within VirtualBox, or um, testing out new software. You can create snapshots so that if something fails, you create a snapshot prior to, for example, installing a latest piece of software. You install the software, it fails, you can always go back to the previous snapshot. The whole intent of this video is to show a quick and dirty way of installing a virtual machine or creating a virtual machine. I'm going to use the latest Ubuntu release and show you how it's done. Here's the main window, VirtualBox window. We're going to start by creating new. You'll see I already have 3 virtual machines already set up. Linux Mint, the latest version, which I created in my video, the first video on uh, in my page here, and you should check that out. Debian 8, the latest release, and Netrunner Linux Rolling, which I love quite a bit as an operating system. We go to new. We'll give it a name. We'll give it Ubuntu. You see how it changes right away? VirtualBox will recognize the more popular operating systems that you want to create a virtual machine from, and they'll already put it as Ubuntu 64-bit, and it's Linux. So we go next. The amount of memory that you want Ubuntu to be able to see, the virtual machine. This will take away from your actual install memory of your host. As we can see here, the limit is 16 gigs, which I have installed in the host. I'll give Ubuntu 4 gigs, which should be 4096 megabytes. There we go. You want to create a virtual disk for this. You have to, because PCs have hard drives or SSD drives, and a virtual PC is the same way. Although it will be virtualized, it'll actually. The interesting thing is the hard drive is actually virtualized as a file. It's an actual file on your hard drive of your host. It's really interesting how this works, and maybe in a later video I'll dig into the nuts and bolts and how it's done. But for now, let's just create a quick and dirty virtual machine running Ubuntu 15. You go create. The default disk image is the VirtualBox disk image. We're going to keep it as it is. Just keep it as default. Dynamically allocated means that even though I might allocate 20 gigs of hard drive space, virtual hard drive space to the virtual machine, on my host machine, the actual hardware, it'll actually be smaller as disk space will be allocated on the fly depending on the demands of the virtual machine that's running. Click next. 8 gigabytes is the standard for this virtual machine, but we're going to give it a little bit more. We're going to go to 15 because if I want to install some hardware and do some other stuff, you can also just type it in. 15 gigs, it's done. There we go. There's Ubuntu. Now, if we start it up now, nothing will happen because it's a virtual machine that's ready for Ubuntu to be installed, but how are we going to get Ubuntu on there? This is when we go into settings. Okay. If you move down to storage, we'll notice that there's 2 drives. There's an optical drive. It's called the IDE optical drive. Don't be alarmed by this. Uh, VirtualBox does this for compatibility's sake with many different operating systems, so it'll work fine. And we have a SATA controller, all virtualized, of course. This is not going to be a real SATA controller. It's all done in software, if you can really wrap your head around that. And we see that the virtual drive is called Ubuntu. We click on the empty um, disk drive, the virtual IDE CD-ROM drive. We come over here and we're going to choose a virtual CD disk file. What you are going to do is select the Ubuntu 15.04 ISO file that I downloaded previously. There we go. Now what that means is that in this virtual machine, I've put the Ubuntu disk in the CD drive. Well, I'm just making an analogy. What I've really done is I've just pointed VirtualBox to the ISO file, and it will use it as if the CD drive has been loaded with the DVD. Sorry, had been loaded with the Ubuntu disk. Let's go through a few more settings you might want to change. General, go to Advanced. For everything to work, we don't really have to change anything here. System, we might have to. Base memory, we're not going to touch. By default, it wants to include a floppy disk as one of the drives. I usually just take that out. I don't need that in there. Again, it's for legacy systems, legacy installs. The rest of this you don't really have to change. Processor, I have a i7, so I have 4 real cores and 4 virtualized cores. The green is the real core, so I'll give it 2 cores. Okay. I do have to point out that when you're talking about system memory that you're allowing the virtual machine to use, this is taken away directly from the amount of real memory that your host computer has. So please be aware of that. Okay, if you have an machine with 8 gigs of RAM and you allocate 8 gigs to a virtual machine, you're going to run into problems, or potentially you could run into problems. But being that I have 16 gigs of RAM in this machine, and I'm allotting only 4 gigs to the virtual machine, I should be okay. If I run multiple virtual machines, I have to be mindful of, the actual physical RAM I have and how much I've allocated to each virtual machine, as each will want to take their own piece. Processor, everything's good. Execution caps, 100%. Basically, you can leave that at default, but be warned. It means that the virtual machine can actually take up 100% of your CPU if something going on or a process going on in it requires as much CPU as possible. If you want to run a virtual machine on a regular basis on top of your desktop, you might want to reduce this so that whatever's going on a virtual machine can't hog the CPU cycles that your host machine also needs for whatever it's doing. This is not necessarily, and you don't need to enable that right now. I've only given it 4 gigs of RAM. We'll get into that another time. Acceleration, both those are enabled. We'll, for this quick and dirty, make sure they are. They are. We're going to leave it as such. For the display, this is the amount of video memory that the virtualized video card will have. I like to max that out. We can't go above 128 megs. I hope that the VirtualBox changes this sometime soon, but it doesn't seem to bother the machine. We can enable 3D acceleration. If we try to enable 2D acceleration on a Linux distribution install, we'll notice that invalid settings, and it'll tell you what it is. We have to turn it off. 3D will work in a Linux virtual machine, but as of now, 2D acceleration will not work, although you will see that it doesn't really matter. And in my next video, I'll actually show you the second part of this video. Actually, I will show you the installed OS running beautifully. Remote display, of course, if you want to enable a remote display server. Video capture is interesting if you like to make YouTube videos or whatnot. I haven't really used this, but it allows you to basically record all the actions going on within your virtual machine. I have to try that one day. Storage, we've already been there. Audio, leave it as it is. By default, it virtualizes an ICH and AC97 audio, which is pretty much universal. Don't gotta really bother with that. If you want to get more fancy, you can always choose Intel HD audio or Sound Blaster 16, whichever you want. But by default, The default is fine. Make sure it's enabled. Network, at least one network adapter is always enabled. You can have up to 4. These are not enabled if you're installing some kind of server. And it uses NAT. So you're going to get a strange looking IP address, but don't worry about that. You can even do things. For example, you can even specify what type of adapter that will be virtualized. In this case, by default, an Intel Pro 1000, which is great, particularly for Linux desktops, as Intel NIC card, network interface card adapters are very well supported under Linux. So we'll leave it as it is. You can even specify a MAC address, by the way, and cable connected or not connected, port forwarding, a lot of things you can do here. And you can do it later too. When the virtual machine is running, you probably won't be able to adjust any of these settings, but if you shut it down, you can always go in and change things. Serial ports, well, if you need a serial port, there you go. USB, there's two ways to attach USB, either through whatever device is USB and is attached to your machine right now. It'll be listed here. You can actually make sure that every time the machine boots, your virtual machine that is, that it will take over one of these devices. I prefer not to do that, as I've had issues in the past where if the virtual machine uses a USB device, then my host machine loses access to it. So I prefer to just add simple filters, and what I'm doing with this top filter button is I can always assign these USB ports to whatever device I have running on the host on the fly, both assign them and remove them. Okay? Shared folders, you can always create a folder on your host machine that the guest machine will also see, the virtual machine, and it's great if you want to like transfer files quickly from the host to the guest machine. Although drag and drop is also supported between host and guest, and that's a setting, another setting, but for the sake of this video, we're just trying to be quick and dirty. So here we go. Now that everything's been, we checked the settings, everything's been done. You can see that inside the CD DVD drive, we have the Ubuntu disk, which is really the ISO file. And then we click start. And the virtual machine will start. A little message about auto capture. Auto capture means that as soon as the cursor, the mouse cursor is over the virtual machine screen or box, all the mouse clicks and key presses will be directed to within the box. Move it out and it comes out. So we can get rid of that. And you will easily see that Ubuntu 15.04 is booting in a virtual machine. Look at that. Let me just move this up here. There we go. There we go. Is that fantastic or what? Ubuntu is running. Now we can either try it or we can install it directly. And since we've created a virtual hard drive, it'll install directly to that hard drive. No fuss, no muss. There we are. We're running Ubuntu as a live CD or DVD. Running beautifully. That's the video, and I hope you enjoyed it. And for the next video, we'll actually show you post-install on how Ubuntu works within a virtual machine and a few other little more detailed tricks. Thanks again, and thanks for watching my video. Please comment below.